what brilliant timing for the first feminist forum, and I'm correcting the title. The first feminist forum on climate justice, please. Not just climate change. I don't talk about climate change. I talk about climate crisis, climate emergency, climate breakdown, or climate justice. And I think today, what's happening? Children all over the world and supportive other adults are marching for climate justice. Millions of them are coming out all over the world, starting in Australia early this morning and last night, whatever it was for their time. And they're marching because of the Fridays for Future. What does this mean for young people? They're calling us out. They don't believe they will have a future unless we do something about it. And they're literally saying, we can't do it. We're children. You have to do it. And this is the most extraordinary day. It's been building up. But I'm telling you, people will remember this day. And I will remember it for lots of reasons, and one of them being the Feminist Forum on Climate Justice. I'm delighted to see a number of very familiar faces. I'm delighted to have brought a friend, Hindu Omari Ibrahim, who chaired the Indigenous Peoples Forum at the COP for a significant number of years, and from whom I've learned a great deal. We met on the street, and she was going to the conference that I had just come from, because she thought I was going to be there. I said, no, you come with me to this other one. Anyway, that's what happens, even in New York. And so the children are speaking truth to power. I mean, I loved when Greta Thunberg said in Davos, our house is burning and all you care about is money. You know, it takes children to cut through all the prevarications and innuendo, just direct. And they are very direct, and they are really very concerned now about our lack of responsibility as the adults in the world for what is happening, and in particular, mothers for what is happening. We don't have to be always serious about this. I discovered that, we're bad at communicating the issue of climate change and the climate emergency, the climate crisis. So I was drawn into a podcast called Mothers of Invention with another much younger Irish woman who was 8 years old when I was elected president. And she's a successful comedian in New York. I'm sure maybe some of you listen to Mothers of Invention, hopefully. Anyway, our byline is that climate change is a man-made problem and requires a feminist solution. And Maeve would never bother explaining it, but I always feel that it's good to explain that man-made is generic, and that a feminist solution definitely includes men, and I know it includes all the men in the room here, but men have to be welcomed to be included, and definitely included in a feminist solution, because it's a solution based on equality. It's a solution based on the solidarity in the 2030 agenda and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals, leaving no one behind. It's the opposite of the kind of economic structure that we have in our world, the neoliberal economic capital structure that we have. So I think that it's really important. When I first started myself to become involved in climate, I felt I had to apologise for being rather late to the table, because when I served as President of Ireland for 7 years, from 1990 to 1997, and then as High Commissioner for Human Rights from 1997 to 2002, I never made a speech on climate, not one, because by the time I got to the UN, I had my own pretty broad area of responsibility, and there was another part of the UN that was dealing with climate change. So I was in a complete silo. It wasn't until I started working with a small NGO that I had founded called Realising Rights, working in African countries on the rights that matter so much if you don't have them. Rights to food, safe water, health, education, jobs, shelter. And I was also honorary president of Oxfam. And everywhere I went in Africa, women would say to me, or communities would say to me, largely women, we just don't know what's happening. Is God punishing us? Everything has changed. this is just outside our experience. And it was the long periods of drought and the flash flooding, it was the rainy seasons that didn't come or didn't come at the right time, etc., etc. And it was undermining food security in particular, and also the stresses of drought on the availability of water, and it was affecting women more than anyone. Now, unfortunately, as I think you know well, the news about climate change gets really worse by the day. I just want to quote a report on the 11th of May of this year. Scientists at the Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii, which tracks atmospheric CO2 levels since the late 1950s, detected 415.26 parts per million. The last time Earth's atmosphere contained this much CO2 was more than 3 million years ago, when global sea level rise, sea levels were several meters higher. So there is a real urgency. Let's talk about climate change at this meeting. If we mention, let's say, either climate justice, where we want to go, or emergency, breakdown, crisis, then we know what we're up against and how much time we have. Let's go back to 2015, where we had the two frameworks that were negotiated, and I had my position as the special envoy of the UN Secretary General at the time on climate change, so I was paying a lot of attention. In September, 193 countries came together and agreed, after 2 years of messy negotiation, they finally agreed the 2030 Agenda and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and I still wear this badge, partly because it's the only badge the UN ever liked. Why was it possible to agree such a good package with lovely language about human rights and gender equality and leaving no one behind, even prioritising the furthest behind first? Because it was voluntary, negotiated to be voluntary. Then we had the Paris Climate Agreement in December, and I was paying more attention to that because that was my particular job. And it was getting weaker and weaker as a treaty. You know, bits were falling off, as they say. And the only thing that really moved was the mantra in the street, 1.5 to stay alive, 1.5 to stay alive, that we had to have that in the text. So what happened, in fact, was we got a new goal articulated for the first time in the Paris Climate Agreement, that the world would have to stay well below 2 degrees Celsius of warming above pre-industrial standards and work for 1.5 degrees. Many people, including myself, thought at that time that the work for 1.5 degrees was a kind of sop to the small island states and least developed countries who tried so hard to get that into the text. That's what we thought. But nobody had studied this. The scientists had not studied this. So they had to ask the scientists. And what the scientists said was very stark and very clear last October. They answered two questions, basically. What's the difference between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees? And if we have to stay at 1.5 degrees, what do we do? What steps do we take? And they answered unusually clearly for scientists. Scientists, sometimes it's the language of science. It's, not always clear. This was very clear. What they said, and I am simplifying a bit, was there is a big difference between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees. In that time, bad things happen. The coral reefs will probably more or less completely disappear. The Arctic ice will probably disappear. And the permafrost, which is already melting, will melt much more severely and throw up not just carbon, but methane, which is far more serious than carbon. So the scientists collectively said the world as a whole must stay, if possible, at 1.5 degrees and not go above that. And any step above that, any tiny step above that, things get worse, seriously worse. And they said to us, you have 12 years. That was last October. We're now in September of the 11th year, and at the end of September of the 11th year. And they said, it is doable if we have the political will. And they said, what we need to do to get on track for a safe world is we have to reduce by 45% global carbon emissions by 2030. That's the 12 years. Last year, emissions went up. This year, emissions will probably go up, almost inevitably will go up. So we're not on track. There is greater awareness, there's greater sense, we've got the marches, we've got the thing, but we're not on track as yet to bend that curve. We need disruption. We need disruption of all kinds. we need litigation, a good disruption, if it works. And more cases are coming forward to try to do that. There was a case, actually, judgment given yesterday in a case in Ireland which failed, sadly. Anyway, they're going to appeal it, and hopefully we'll see. But, there are cases all over the world. Shareholders questioning in corporations. Mark Carney in the Bank of England saying to investors, don't be too invested in what will become stranded assets, warning them. Extinction Rebellion, people prepared to go even to jail to disrupt things. We actually need a whole combination of things, but more than anything else, we need what is happening today. We need a climate justice movement. And it's really heartening to see women leaders stepping forward, more than I've ever seen. And this is a good example. I mean, literally, I do make the point that African women leaders have been talking about climate change for quite a long number of years because it's so real in their lives. Asian women the same. But I would go to meetings in Europe and here in the United States, even 2 years ago, even maybe a year and a half ago, and we would talk about Me Too, equal pay, violence against women, health, education, and then climate without quite knowing what we wanted to say about climate. That was literally the case. After this 1.5 degree report last October, warning us about the 12 years, talking about our children and grandchildren, suddenly women leaders have woken up. And it is very much part of this movement of the school children striking, of the young people making their voices heard, of the Extinction Rebellion, and of the increasing business and investment leadership, making commitments and calling for more ambition from governments. And the importance of this growing climate justice movement is that it will call for a just transition to a world powered by clean energy and climate actions that fully respect human rights. So workers in the coal, oil and gas sections won't be left out, and priority will be given to reaching the 1.1 billion people that still lack electricity and the 2.3 billion, mainly women, who cook with charcoal, coal, peat and animal dung. It's extraordinary. We have all the gadgets. We have the mini systems. We have the clean cook stoves. We have the solar panels. We have it all. We just don't have the moonshot approach yet. That's what we need to say, within 5 years, we will reach, or at the latest 10 years, we will reach every person. And that would make a difference. So I'm going to end with what I usually say to audiences now, 3 steps that I think fit with the frameworks I was talking about earlier. And the 3 steps basically are, first of all, to make climate change personal in your own life. And the way you do that is you do something you weren't doing before. It's to do with the issue of your own, reducing your own consumption emissions, and maybe energy conservation, and maybe better recycling, maybe a change in your eating habits. I've become a pescatarian. I don't eat meat anymore. Still pine for lamb from the west of Ireland, but I don't cheat, gone. And having done this, the second step is to get angry and to get active, to get angry with those who have more responsibility and aren't doing enough. And that's governments right across the board. It's business, particularly the fossil fuel, but also agribusiness, transport, etc. And take action to support those who are doing the right thing in conservation, in bringing energy to those in energy poverty, and so on. And the third step, and I think this is the most important, is to imagine this world that we must be hurrying towards, because it will be a much healthier world. We won't have the choking and the stifling of fossil fuel pollution on air and on water. We will have a much more equal world, because to get there, we will have had to implement the Sustainable Development Goals with the solidarity of those goals, getting clean energy to developing countries to let them develop without emissions. So let me end by basically, on today, watching those television photos of millions of children coming out. I really want to thank those children. They have mainstreamed intergenerational injustice. It hits every family in the world in different ways, but every family is affected by the fact that young people are calling us out and saying, I had a lovely text this morning from my youngest grandchild. I'm a lucky Irish grandmother. I have 6 grandchildren. Manaz and I compare grandchildren quite often when we meet. Mine range from 15 to 2 years old. And I had a picture of a 2-year-old holding a placard that said, "Don't burn my future." Now that was written by somebody, but she had scribbled all over it. I thought to myself, that's what it's about. You know, if 2-year-olds are getting out and telling us, "Don't burn my future," that's a wake-up call, and that's really why we need a feminist forum and a